Okay, so what we need to look at today is we're going to talk about dimensioning. And in order to do that, we're going to need to create a proper annotative dimensioning style that we can use for our demonstration today during class, and that you will also be able to copy over to your template file as well, so that you can use it for your term project when it comes time to add dimensions to it. When we work with dimensions in AutoCAD, a couple of things to keep in mind tonight as we're going through the demonstration file and as you move on to your um, term project is that you want to try to make sure that you're being accurate when you place these dimensions. So making sure that you have your object snaps turned on, making sure that you have the object snaps activated that you will need, right? We don't need to turn them all on, but there's a few that we all like to work with. Because as you connect your dimensions to the different objects that you're dimensioning, you will have to make sure that you're snapping to those objects in an accurate manner. Okay, so when we get ready to dimension in AutoCAD, just like when we work with layers, just like when we work with text, we want to make sure that we take the proper steps to prepare ourselves. Okay. So in your template file, you do have a layer specifically created for dimensions. It's called A-dim. So we want to make sure that we select the proper layer. We also want to check to make sure that our annotative scale is set appropriately. If we leave our annotative scale at 1:1, then the final dimension that we place will be, the line work will connect to the proper points, it will span the proper distance, but the text and the symbols part of the dimension will be very small and undersized. So if we set this to 1/4 inch equals a foot, which is our intended um, plot size for the final plot, um, this can save us a little bit of time, not having to go back later and update them. And when we place our dimensions, the text and symbol component should be coming out proper in the first place. Okay. By default, with AutoCAD, if we go to our annotation palette and we drop down our annotation menu at the bottom, you can see we have our text style, our dimension style, the leader style, and table styles. In the dimension styles area, we have our annotative option and we have our standard option. By the preview of these options, I hope that you can tell that they don't really adhere to what we would normally see as an architectural style, right? So if we were to use these right now, we were to dimension an object from point A to point B, we get something that we would normally not see in architecture or construction. Okay, so this is why one of the first steps that we're going to do tonight is to set up our custom dimension style that we'll be using in your personal template files and your term project for this class. Okay, I'm gonna delete this. So when you want to set up your own style, we're going to go back to our drop-down menu from the annotation palette. On the left-hand side, there is a button that says Dimension Style. What this actually is the Dimension Style Manager. So if we click on this button, okay, it's the paintbrush with the dimension line, a window should pop open, which gives us the ability to use one of the current styles and manipulate it, or to create our own based on these as a template. So for our class, what you should be doing is we should select the annotative option. And on the right-hand side, we're going to click on the button that says New. When this new window pops open, we're going to name our style. Okay, so if we look back to our handout that we have for this week, for this assignment, sorry, I should stay here. Let's go back up to the top. Okay, here's our assignment. The style that we should be naming, right, is going to be called dim-arc. Okay, so that's going to be the name for our current style that we're setting up. So for the new style name, I will call this dim-arc. I want to start with the annotative style because I do want this to be annotative. The annotative checkbox should be ticked. There should be a check mark there. And we're going to use this style for all of our dimensions. At some offices, they like to set up different styles for different types of dimensions, but it's fairly standard to have one style to rule them all. Okay, so it's not necessary to set up different styles for every type of dimension. It's okay to use the standard one that we're creating today. Okay, and we'll be able to use this for all these different types of dimensions. Okay, so once we've named it and we've made sure that we have these options checked and set up the way that we see, we can hit continue. And from this point, we're going to go through these different tabs that we have available to us. You don't necessarily have to use them all, but we will go through them and try to explain what they're for. And what we're going to do is we're going to alter some of these options so that we can create a dimension style that we would consider to be a little bit more accurate to an industry standard. Okay, so as we go through this setup, we're going to talk about a number of different items. Okay, is Zoom crashing? What's Zoom doing right now? Oh, see, I have the windows open right now, but it actually won't let me. It actually won't let me alter this. Hang on one second. Zoom is such a pest. Is it still running? Dear God. Okay, sorry, I had to stop it. It's not. Okay, so Zoom's not letting me annotate over top of AutoCAD, so I'm going to annotate in here instead. Basically, what I wanted to do was I wanted to give you a little bit of a refresher on the different parts of a dimension line. Okay, so in AutoCAD, when we create this dimension line, all right, forgive me if it's not totally square into scale. All right, yeah, ticks. Up top, we have our text, right, which will be yellow. Okay. Down below, there's actually, okay. So I wanted to talk about this and label it up for you a little bit. So when we set this up in AutoCAD, there's a couple of different main components here that we're going to discuss directly. All right, so let's label these for a second. Wow, the arrow's so big. I don't want such a big arrow. Let's go, let's be a smaller one. Perfect. Okay. So there's that guy. This guy. Oh, I went the wrong way. Here and here. Okay. So we're going to label these for you. Okay, so when we snap to objects in AutoCAD, what's going to happen is that AutoCAD creates something called an origin. Okay, and that origin is just a very small node, right? We looked at that point object a couple of weeks ago, right? Week number 7. So it creates a point object, which it uses to control the placement of the dimension object. Okay, so that's called the origin. The lines that protrude, that extend perpendicular to the object, right? The lines that extend upwards are called the extensions, right? That makes pretty good sense. Okay, the line that goes horizontal between the two extensions is the actual dimension line. Okay, this is the dimension line that goes back and forth. Of course, we have our dimension text. Okay, and where the dimension line and the extensions cross, okay, we usually have this symbol, the architectural tick. So the technical name for that is the terminator. Right, you can do your best Arnold impersonation. I used to do it, but apparently it wasn't very good. I got asked to stop. Okay, so those are the main things that we're setting up. And once we go through the setup and we complete these items, then we should be pretty good to go and use that. Okay, so let's switch back to AutoCAD. Okay, so if we go through the handout, basically we're just going to use the same settings that are displayed for you in that handout. So for the fit options, okay, we're on the fit tab. Okay, if there isn't enough room to place both the text and the arrows inside the extension lines, the first thing to move outside the extension is, well, ideally we don't want the text to be bumped around. So we always want to keep the text between the extensions. For the text placement, we want it always to be over the dimension line without a leader. And for the fine tuning option here, you can see in our preview how the dimension line is being removed from where the text is here. So we want to always make sure that we draw that dimension line between the extensions. Okay, we always want to have that available to us. So you can select those options. The annotative option we should leave on. Okay, we don't want to play with that. Okay, in the next area, we're going to look at our units. So obviously the units that we're using should match the units of our drawing. So we're going to switch this to architectural. The precision might vary from our drawing, however, because you know, when I draft, when I'm working, I set my precision to 1/64. Okay, that's how I like to have it. But I would never dimension to that level, right? I would never expect a contractor to measure to 3/64 or 7/64. That would be a little bit ridiculous. Even getting into 30 seconds or 16ths, they won't always be super happy with you. So the most I would ever go is 16ths. Okay, most tape measures and measuring devices on site won't go beyond that are common, okay, and accessible to people. Fraction format, not stacked, right? We want to make sure we have those full height fractions. So you can see the horizontal option means that they're stacked vertical, and the diagonal option is diagonal. I don't know why horizontal, I don't know why that's reversed, but it is what it is. But the option that you want is to have them not stacked. Okay, down below, the measurement scale, should we play with this? Probably not, right? If you change the measurement scale, then it will probably give you the wrong dimension. So if I put a 2 in there for every inch, it reports back 2 inches. So you should always leave this at 1 and not play around with it really at all. Okay, be very careful with it. The zero suppression, we do want to suppress 0 feet, but we don't want to suppress 0 inches. Okay, so that's just controlling the format on how AutoCAD reports numbers back to us. Okay, angular dimensions. Okay, we can report to 2 decimal places. Even if on site, they're just going to get as close as they can. You know, there is a lot more technology available for measuring angles these days, and they might even have access to survey equipment. So we want to try to be as precise as possible when it comes to angles. Okay. The next window that we're going to is our symbols and arrows. This is where we will start to see some of the overall changes on how the lines are displaying themselves. Okay, so arrowheads, okay, are terminators. Okay, we want to make sure that we use the architectural tick. Okay, it should update automatically to match both. You can see the change in your preview here. Okay, for our architectural tick sizes, we're going to go with 1/8. Okay, it's a little bit smaller, keeps things a little bit tidier. I think overall it looks nicer. When we go through and we set up these different symbols and stuff at this point, we're going to try to maintain that 1/8 to be consistent. So we're going to keep our center marks at 1/8 as well. Okay, the break size is 1/8. The arc length symbol, you can choose either one of these options, right? You know, once we finish this, you know, we'll hit OK. We'll go back to the main window. You can come back and edit it and make updates as many times as you want. Okay, so if you missed something that's particular to our assignment or to our class, you could always go back and change it and fix things. If you take this style and you want to make it your own afterwards, you can come back and tweak things a little bit if you want to. Okay, so for the arc length symbol though, my preference is that it precedes the text. Okay, that means it comes before the text. You can also put it above, which some people prefer, but it's up to you. The radius jog is always 45, and the linear jog dimension, we don't really care about that. So we're going to leave it to 1.5. Okay. On the next page, we have our lines. Okay, these are our dimension and extension lines now. Okay, so remember the extensions are the goalposts and the dimension lines are the crossbar. Okay, we're looking at the horizontal option here. So the color for our lines is going to be by block. So by block is the same as saying that it's by layer. Okay, so it's going to get its color from the current layer that you have selected. So because we're using the A-dimension layer, right, all of our dimension lines will be red and all of our extension lines will be red. Okay. So the extension of the dimension will be 1/8. Okay. The baseline spacing is 1/4 inch. Okay, we don't need to suppress these lines. We don't really want to, right? You should leave them unchecked. Okay, the extension of the extensions should match the extension of the dimensions, right? That's a tongue twister for you. So basically our extension for both of these should be the same. So we want them both to be 1/8. Okay, so that they look nice and square at the corners. Okay, one of the hardest things is what we're going to do next. So the next thing that we're going to set up is going to be our text. Okay, so the text doesn't have to be complicated. What you want to remember is that AutoCAD is going to control the dimension text size through the text dialog here that we see, right? We have an option here for text height, okay? But as far as the text style, we don't have that preset that will be matching the same style that we created in our template file. So what we're going to have to do is create a custom text style that is specific to our dimensions. So on the box on the right-hand side, okay, there's 3 dots here. We're going to click this option and AutoCAD will open up the text dialog. So what you want to do is you want to start with the standard text option. Okay, we're going to click on new. Okay, we'll name this after our favorite brother, Dim. Okay. And for this dimension text style, we want to make sure that we match the font that we used in our other document. So for me, that would be Swiss 721. Okay. So it should be named dim. We should match our font. Okay. And the most important thing is that the annotative option should be unchecked and the height should be 0. So on your handout in the PDF, that height is circled. So you make sure you pay attention to that. You want your height in this style to be 0. Because if you remember, we're actually going to control that height back in our other dialog. Okay. So once we've set that up, we can hit apply and close. And from our original window, we can now select that as our style. Okay. So if we leave the text color by block, that means that it will pick up its color from the current layer that we have selected. In all of our other documents, in your symbol library and in the text styles that we created last week, the layer that we're using is going to be yellow. So this is one situation where we're going to change that by block option, and we're going to force this text to be yellow so that it matches. We want it to be the same line weight and consistency as the other text in our document and symbols. The text height for our dimensions is going to be 330 seconds. Okay, and now we'll do our last couple of options here. So for the text placement, we're almost finished. We're doing really good. Okay, for the text placement, we want it to be above the line. Horizontally, of course, it should be centered. We read from the left to right, right, in North America and a lot of the world, not always, depending on where you go. Offset from the line should be 1/16. Then we're going to tuck it in a little bit tighter. Keep things nice and tidy. And then the option that will give us the most flexibility, or the most get us a little bit closer to that proper look, is for the alignment. And we want to make sure that the text is always aligned with the dimension. There we go. Now we have something that we can actually work with. Okay, so the other tabs here that we didn't touch on were alternate units and tolerances. Both of these tabs are not necessary for what we're doing in our current class. They may be something that you touch on in the future or in other classes, but we won't be using them. Basically, with alternate units, you can choose to display a metric measurement for comparison, sometimes with clients, sometimes with review boards. Not everybody understands feet and inches. Not everybody understands millimeters. So having the ability to display an alternate unit sometimes can help bridge the gap and make the communication of the project a little bit easier to the other people that are involved. Okay. So you wouldn't be able to build off of alternate units. You can't build properly off of scaled units. If you were doing a imperial project, everything would be imperial. If we decided halfway through to switch to metric, we would have to redraw that project to metric units. You can't just scale the drawing because the scaling will get you close, but it doesn't work out properly. Okay, so you have to be very, very careful about that. Tolerances would be for when we're machining, right? You want to list and make sure that the machine shop, the fabricator, knows the tolerances that he has to work within. Tolerances for architecture normally would not be used. And actually, to be honest, I've never seen them used in an office properly, right? When I was fabricating architectural metal, when we were doing custom frames and custom structural components, we worked with tolerances all the time. But that was for the machine shop, right? In architectural drawings, tolerances are not something that you would normally see. Okay, so these last two tabs we don't really need to worry about. So if we've set this up, okay, we have everything correct, we can hit OK. Remember that if something doesn't work out, you can always go back to your style manager, select your custom style that you created, and modify it. So you can go back through and you can fix things if you didn't quite get the numbers right the first time, or select the right setting. Okay, so during class right now, if something did go wrong, don't stress out. What I would recommend is that we watch what I'm doing. We'll go through the different ways of using these different dimension styles and what some of the options available to us are. And then we'll have a break. When we come back in lab, if you would like, I'm more than happy to go through your dimension style with you and try to sort out how to fix it if we had any problems. Okay. Okay, so close. So we have our proper layer selected. We have our proper annotative style, annotative scale selected. In our dimension dropdown, okay, we have the proper dimension style. Okay, and now I'm ready to go. So when you dimension, as noted before, make sure you're using your object snaps to connect to your objects accurately. In the annotation palette, there's two ways of dimensioning. There's this new smart dimension. I don't like it. I don't feel like it works. So I've never used it. So I cannot teach it to you properly. Instead, what I'm going to show you are the older tools, which do exactly what you expect them to, right? They're not super fancy, but they do the job properly and they can get it done. I don't like this new one because I feel like it's just way too much of a involved process, and their dimensions. You know, I don't want to spend time on my dimensions. I want to make sure that they're accurate. I want to make sure that they're neat and tidy and placed well. But I don't want to spend, you know, the enormous amount of time that I find needs to go into this new tool. Okay, I want to get things done. So we'll start with linear and we'll work our way down to jogged. We're not going to do ordinate. We won't use that for architecture. Okay, so linear. Linear dimensions create dimensions which are horizontal or vertical, right? Depending on which way you pull away from the object, right? So we have a horizontal dimension or we have a vertical dimension. Even if you turn your orthographic mode off, those are the two options that you have. So when we dimension our object, okay, we snap first to the outside corner, and then we snap to the next position. So in this case, where we have a vertical line, the proper place to snap is at the top. We want to snap at the top. And then we move away from the object an adequate amount. Okay, so you want to give yourself a little bit of space. You don't want too much space unless you have no other choice. You also don't want it to be too close. So you want to give yourself a little bit of space and try to be consistent as you go around your drawing. Okay, so if we don't snap to the top portion of this vertical line, you don't get the separation that we see, right? If we take that origin and we drag it down to the bottom, now we don't have that distinction, right? We don't have that break between the object and the dimension line. So we want to make sure that we snap to the right place. Okay. Standard way of approaching this would be to dimension the first distances, right? We're going to do the shorter distances first, and then we're going to do one overall distance. So when you place the second dimension and the next dimensions after that, we want to make sure that we snap to the existing one so that they all line up nice and straight. And here's my last one. And go nice and straight. Okay, so there's our first set of linear dimensions on the horizontal. And here's our next set on the vertical. And we're going to try to keep consistent. Okay, so instead of using the linear tool over and over again, if you select a dimension, you can hover over top of the architectural tick, right, the terminator, and it will give you an option here, and you can choose to continue the dimension. So if we choose to continue, AutoCAD will place the next dimension and the next dimension on and on as necessary. So that can help speed things up a little bit. After we've done our shorter distances, we can then proceed and do the overall. So there's always different opinions on whether you should dimension snapping to the object overall, or if you should dimension snapping to the dimension overall. You can snap to that cross section there. Okay, different people will have different preferences. Okay. For your term project, it does not matter to me. Okay, so there's our linear dimensions. Next, we have aligned dimensions. So sometimes we have walls that are on an angle. So AutoCAD, based on the first 2 points that you snap to, will align a dimension to them. Okay, you have to be careful though, because if I do this next distance, based on these endpoints that I snap to, it won't really work out. So the proper way to get this to work and keep things nice and straight is to select this dimension and use that continue option. And the continue option will keep the same alignment and allow you to dimension on the same trajectory, the same vector. And then using the trick that we used before, we can snap to the existing dimensions, and that alignment will now give us this overall. Okay. Next, we have angular dimensions. If we select two objects, two lines, AutoCAD will allow us to dimension between them. It'll give us the angle in degrees. It does exactly what it says it will do. Arc length. Okay, so we have an arc on the outside wall here. Okay, we can measure this arc length in an appropriate manner. You can see with our preceding arc symbol, the other option was to have it above. This is with the preceding. I like this one. This is my preference. Be careful when you do the arc distances. Sometimes they don't measure the whole way like you think they will, right? So this stops just short of the wall. So we would either have to use a linear dimension to finish that or to go back and check our line work, okay? Make sure we deal with that appropriately. We have radius, okay? There's our radius. By default, it will always try to push the number to the outside. Sometimes that can get a little bit messy if you have other dimensions or objects. So what I like to do is I like to pull this text into the middle. The trouble with that is that we've now broken this object. So you can see that now the text is not above the dimension line any longer, right? See with all these other options, how it's always above the line. When we drag it to the inside, it's placed it on the top of the dimension line, right? It's right on the center there. So if you want to fix that, you can select it. And if you hover over top of the grip for the text, you can then choose to move it above the dimension line again and fix that. Okay. We can also measure a diameter. Okay, same problem. Not ideal placement in my opinion. So I can move it towards the inside and I will have to hover and select above dimension line to sort that out. Okay. There will always be a time when you have to be careful with both the radius and the diameter dimensions. They are fine in smaller, tighter radius or diameters, but on larger arcs or gentle movements, you can get a lot of extra line work, right? So what I mean by that is on the side, over on the side here, if we were to dimension this radius, you can see how much extra line work goes shooting off into space. And what it's doing is it's just marking the center of that radius, right? It's marking the center of that radius for us. So the further away from the arc the radius sits, the more line work, unnecessary line work you will create. And if you were to dimension the diameter, it gets to be even worse. Okay, so in this sort of a situation where we have very gentle arcs, we would use something called a jog dimension. So the jog dimension, okay, what it allows you to do is to get the proper radius, but to override where the center point is. So you get the cheat a little bit and create something that's much more compact. So for the jogged option, okay, we select our arc, and now we're going to specify where the center point is. So we could lie and say it's off to the outside. We can put it to the inside. It's up to you. Okay, I'm going to choose right here. And now I'm going to place my text, and then I'm going to place my object. Okay, so there's my radius measurement with a much more compact dimension object, right? And I can move this out here a little bit if I want to keep things a little bit tidier, right? It's kind of whatever you want to do. Just have to be a little bit careful with it. Go put it above again. Okay, so lots of different options there. When it does come to options for your dimensions, in our ribbon at the very top here, if you go over to the Annotate tab, there's a lot more options here for the dimension object, right? There's lots of different things that you can set up. Some of them we've talked about already, right? There's the continue option as well. You know, if we were to go back and take another look at these items, let's get rid of these. Okay, a lot of these tools now are available from these menus, right? So we can also do a baseline dimension where it keeps the same origin, but it just gives further and further distances. Okay, those are both found here, baseline and continue. right? Or for most cases, such as your term project, we would just use that continue option, right? If we have dimensions where we can't help it, but they end up crossing over each other, okay, you want to adjust this a little bit so that the text doesn't sit on the line. And then where these lines intersect, we would always put a break, right? So you can select one or the other. I usually select the vertical first, and then the horizontal, right? And then the horizontal becomes the primary dimension. The vertical will have a break to it so that they're separated. You can use the same tool to remove it as well if you want to. There's the dimension jog option. Okay, so we can place a jog in here if we want to, if you have dimensions that skip over distance. Okay, reassociate and disassociate. So by default, if we were to look at our command line, there is a command called dim association, DIMASSOC. You can see it in my command line right now. So dim association for AutoCAD should always be 1 or 2. Okay, there's actually 3 options. There's 0, 1, or 2. By default right now, our dim association is 2. What that means is that if I was to dimension this box, okay, when I move this object, the dimension line is actually attached to it. Okay, so that's with dim association of 2. If we set it to 1, okay, same thing, we'll move this box again. The line does not move automatically. It doesn't attach itself. So I actually prefer 1, but you know, everyone has different ways of how they like to work. That's fine. You know, to keep things simple, you could leave it as it is by default at 2. Okay. If you do create some objects that are not associated, you can use this reassociate option. Okay, so it's a dimension line with the chain link. And what it does is it asks you to select the object. So we're going to pick our dimension line. And then we're going to pick the first origin. It tries to mark where it thinks it's attached. Right? Let's put a little mark here. Sorry, let's start once more. Okay, so it's marked where it thinks the first point is, and then we also snap it to the second point. And that reassociates that object to your line work. Okay. The other thing that can happen is even this horizontal dimension, it's attached right now. But if I was to drag this grip away, even if I put it back, I've now broken that link. Okay, so sometimes you might have to reassociate the objects if you want them to function in this way. Okay. Okay, so a couple of warnings. Just deleting these. 2 things to look out for. So in your options here, you have the quick dimension and you have the override. Okay, so this is one way to access the override. I'll show you another way in a few seconds. Actually, I don't use this one very much, but there is an option here. And sometimes people, they end up using it. So quick dimension, you pick the object, hit enter, and it dimensions for you. Please don't do this, okay? It looks messy. I can tell that you use the quick dimension usually pretty quickly, right? Well, we forgot the horizontal ones. There we go. Now it's perfect. Okay, so please don't do this. Okay, I would much rather you get a little bit less dimensioning done but do it properly than put no effort into it and have a total mess like this. Okay, it's not acceptable. Okay, if you hand in your project with quick dimensions like this, you get 0 for that component. Okay, so no, please don't do this. Okay, the other one is the text override. Okay, so when we dimension our line work, okay, sometimes we don't quite get the numbers that we want, right? So if the concept behind this was that these first dimensions were supposed to be 4'3", right? When we dimension our objects and we don't see the proper dimensions, that probably means that we didn't draw it properly. So when you're dimensioning your project, if you're not getting the proper dimensions, you need to go back and check your line work. You need to go back and check your floor plans again. Okay, mine are not wrong, yours are not correct. So you need to go check your work. Okay, so in this case, the proper way to address this situation is to use stretch or some other method to make sure that we adjust our line work so that it's proper. Okay, we want to make sure that we're adjusting the line work and not cheating on the dimension. So what some people will do is through the properties palette, sometimes they will come down to the text section and they will use the text override. So this was supposed to be 4'3", right? 4'3". There. Oh, 4'4". Well, I better change that. 4'3". Okay. The trouble with this is that on our proper dimensions, when we adjust this line work, we get adjusted dimensions. They update automatically. But on this overridden one, no matter what we do, it will always read 4'3". Okay, I've had projects in the past where people have done this, and then we've shipped millwork that is completely the wrong size because they overrode the dimension and caused a lot of problems. So we don't want to override this. Okay. You can also do this. Okay. Don't mess around with that text. We always want it to be accurate. So if that does happen for some reason, you can always go to your text and just make your text override blank. Okay, so we don't override the text and we don't use those quick dimensions. Okay, so I'm going to pause for 1 second.